My name is Jonathan, and I am just so deeply honored and privileged to be here tonight with you. So before I do my thing, I just have a few pieces of housekeeping, if you'll bear with me. First and foremost, gotta be real with you, I don't sit still very well. And I know that I'm not alone in that either. So in the spirit of learning diversity and inclusion, I want to empower you, if you are like me, to do whatever you need to do to have a good experience tonight. If that means you need to go to the back of the room and pace back and forth during my talk, that's cool. If that means you need to leave the room during my presentation, no problem. I won't be offended. I myself may wander off in the middle of my presentation. And you all will be accepting, inclusive, and accommodating of that, I'm sure, right? But in all seriousness, there are as many ways to learn as there are humans in this room right now. So you do you, and you learn in the way that is right for you. Okay, second, the more important piece of housekeeping, hey, want to give a big old shout out to the folks at Rolling Hills Prep and Renaissance Schools. Thank them, obviously, for the opportunity to be here tonight, but not just the opportunity to be here tonight, but the opportunity to speak essentially to the entire school population during the day. It was a great honor and privilege. But more importantly than inviting me here, I want to thank them and recognize and celebrate them for their deep and, from my perspective, unprecedented commitment to inclusion and neurodiversity. I'll tell you, what I saw today, what I heard from students, what I learned about this educational program makes it hands down one of the most innovative and inclusive programs, not just in LA, but in the entire country and universe of independent schools. And that matters, and that's important, and that deserves a big old round of applause. You know, okay, with all that kind of housekeeping said and done, let me just get right to it. I was asked here this evening to share with y'all my journey as a young person, a student with learning and intentional differences. And I'll be honest, it at times was a tough journey and a hard road. I was the kid in elementary school who had such a hard time sitting still that I spent most of the day chilling out with the janitor in the hallway, right? I was the kid in middle school who had such a hard time keeping his mouth shut that I grew up on a first name basis with Shirley, the receptionist, in the principal's office, right? And I was the kid in high school who had such a hard time with reading, and specifically a terrible, torturous time reading out loud, that I spent most of my high school experience hiding in the bathroom to escape reading out loud with tears streaming down my face. As you all heard in my introduction, I did not learn to read until I was 12. Didn't learn to read until I was 12. Growing up, I had every label you could imagine. I was called the bad kid, I was called the dumb kid, I was called the lazy kid, and then eventually I became the special ed kid. I was diagnosed with a continuum of language-based learning differences, dyslexia, dysgraphia, and others in 3rd grade. Diagnosed with ADD, which we all know stands for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in 4th grade. And I dropped out of school for about a year in 6th grade. That year when I left school, I struggled with a number of mental health challenges. I struggled with anxiety, I struggled with depression, and I had a plan for suicide. I spent about a year in and out of a variety of different educational programs after leaving my public school. I went to alternative schools for a minute. I went to special education specific programs for a second, and then, if I'm honest with y'all, I went to no school. I was at home trying to rebuild a sense of self, a sense of value, a sense of efficacy as a human being. So you can imagine by the time I got back in traditional school, my adolescence, there were a whole bunch of low expectations that surrounded me. Low expectations that too often surround folks with neurodiversities. I heard it all. I was told that I'd most likely end up a high school dropout. I was told that I would flip burgers. I was told at one point that I'd end up incarcerated or in jail. So I was asked here tonight to talk about how I transcended those low expectations, how I beat those odds, because it goes without saying that none of those very hopeful prophecies came to pass in my life. You know, opposed to being a high school dropout, as you heard, I became a college graduate. I graduated from Brown University, which you may or may not know is an Ivy League university, with an honors degree in, of all things, English literature, right? Opposed to flipping burgers, I ended up writing books. First book I wrote when I was an undergraduate at Brown at the age of 21. And most importantly, opposed to being an inmate, you know, I became an advocate. Somebody who has dedicated his entire professional life to making the world a better place for folks who live and learn outside the lines. So I was asked here tonight to talk about that journey with you. I was asked here tonight to answer a very valid question that I'm sure is in your mind when you heard about that journey. You know, I'm asked all the time by moms and dads, I'm asked by educators, I'm asked by students themselves, hey Jonathan, how'd you do it, right? How could you go from a 6th grade dropout who could not read at 12 to an Ivy League English major, published author? What drugs did you take? And where can I buy some, right? I know that's the question on y'all's mind. And that's the question that I want to answer. You know, I want to answer it as it pertains to my own journey, of course, but more importantly, I want to answer it as it pertains to the 1 in 5 young folks around the country with neurodiversity. Because more than ever, we know what puts those young folks on a path towards healing, a path towards thriving. And I want to share that research with you tonight. So with that in mind, there are really 3 things, you know, in my own journey, in the research literature, and in the personal testimonies of other young folks who have beat those odds and transcended those low expectations. 3 things. I want to share those with you now. Then we'll open it up and we'll have a chance to talk together. So let me start first and foremost with what was the most important first step on my journey to change. You know, empowerment for kids with learning differences can only happen if we redefine who or what we call the problem. You know, for most of human history, normal is good and right, and if you deviate from the middle of the bell curve, you are wrong and deficient. We put the problem in the difference, and we turn differences into disorders and pathologies. You know, I know that personally, right? I remember when I was first diagnosed, you know, and the school psychologist called me and my mom into her office to give us the test results. And the moment me and my mom walked into that office, it was obvious that everybody in the room thought we were getting terrible, tragic news. You know, the lights were turned down low. There was jazz music playing in the background. There was a box of tissues on the table. Because everybody thought we were there to mourn the death of my normality. Right? We think of these things that are differences through the lens of deficiencies. And we put the problem in the person or the child. But the reality is these things that we have been acculturated to see as deficits or disorders are differences in the truest sense of the word. And the problem isn't the difference, but the way the difference is treated in institutions designed for the myth that we should all learn the same way. Let me use my life experience as a way to illuminate that paradigm shift of where the problem lies. Let's take this thing we call ADD, right? You know, go to all the academic conferences, read all the research literature, and it implies that I have a problem with my brain, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But you know what? This thing called a deficit or a disorder is a difference. in the truest sense of that phrase. A difference with challenges and a difference with strengths, gifts, and talents. I'm not naive about the challenges that come with having my brain. Y'all know I struggle with executive functioning to this day. I struggle with organization. I have explored the feasibility of stapling my car keys to my forehead. Okay? I got that. Those are neurobiologically based challenges. Those are real. But you know what goes hand in hand with the neurobiologically based challenges? A whole bunch of neurologically based strengths, gifts, and talents that we don't talk enough about. Y'all know there's solid research that shows that people with atypical attentions are better problem solvers than the general population. Came across a research study recently that showed that EMTs, emergency medical professionals, firemen and women, paramedics with ADD are better at their job than so-called normal EMTs. That makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, your house is on fire. You want that dude to have ADD, right? Forget paying attention. Come get my cats, you know? So it's a difference with some challenges and with some good things. It is not, however, my problem. My problem isn't ADD. My problem is the school desk. How in God's name could a school desk be a kid's problem? Well, let me immerse you into my relationship with the school desk, and it is a fraught relationship, right? You know, for some kids, school desk, not a big deal, right? It is a benign piece of school furniture. For me, the school desk might as well be a form of enhanced interrogation that would make Dick Cheney proud, okay? This is my experience at the school desk. 1st grade, 12th grade, Brown University, does not matter tonight. I see that desk, I see that chair, and my hands start to sweat. My face gets all red because I know after 5 seconds at the desk, the foot's gonna start bouncing, right? 10 seconds at the desk, both feet start bouncing. 15 seconds at the desk, oh, I'm gonna bust out the drums. 15 minutes at the desk, it is all over. I'm the kid trying to take his leg and put it behind his neck, right? And that young person is shamed for that behavior because we have a set of cultural and institutional norms that confuses or conflates being the good kid with being the compliant kid. And if you're not the compliant kid that sits still, raises their hand, keeps their mouth shut, something is wrong with you. You know, I got that message at home. I grew up in an old school Irish Catholic household, so every night at the dinner table with my dad, it was Jonathan, stop it, stop it, stop it. What is wrong with you? And I got the same message in some of my classrooms. Not all of my classrooms, don't get me wrong, but some of them. I'll never forget, I had a teacher in 2nd grade named Mrs. C. I've had many, many gifted, brilliant teachers in my life who I will celebrate with you tonight. Mrs. C is not one of those, okay? My foot would be bouncing. She would stop class. She would point at me. All the kids would look at me, and she would say at the top of her lungs, Jonathan, what is your problem? Put the problem in the person. When the reality is, the problem's not in the difference or the kid with the difference. The problem is in the interaction of difference and context. The problem is the passive learning environment where kids on average spend 75% of the day sitting still. The problem is in the shame and social stigma that comes from being called the problem. That's the problem. Let me give you one of the best examples of that social stigma that I've encountered in all of my travels. You know, one of the things I love doing most is talking to young folks. And back in the day, I gave a talk in Green Bay, Wisconsin, to third graders. And I walked into the classroom to give this presentation, and I could see in the back of the room a set of boxes made out of bookshelves about 3 feet tall. So they took the bookshelves, made a box about this big. And in the box, I could see a head bouncing up and down. It was one of the third graders in the box jumping. Now that's not a sight you see every day, right? So I turned to the teacher, and with all due respect, I said, "Hey man, what's up with the box? You know, what's going on?" Guy looked at me with a straight face, not a hint of irony, and said, "Jonathan, that's Jack." I said, "You have a Jack in the box?" Poor little Jack in the back of the room. Hey, I don't gotta believe at this point. ADD ain't Jack's problem. The box is Jack's problem. The way difference is treated is the problem. And the same is true with my so-called learning disabilities. You know, folks come to my story all the time and they say, "Hey man, that must really suck to be dyslexic." And I say, "No, it doesn't. It's a difference, you know?" And just like ADD, a difference with neurobiologically based weaknesses and neurobiologically based strengths and gifts. I'm not naive again about the challenges that come with having the dyslexic brain. You know, I struggle with spelling. I spell at a third grade level today. I struggle with reading. I have the phonetic awareness of somebody in 5th or 6th grade. I confuse, to this day, words that look alike. Who and how. Horse and house. Those look the same to me. You know, when I went to college, I thought Brown University offered a course in orgasmic chemistry, okay? Imagine my disappointment on the first day of that class. So come on, I get it. You know, those are real challenges, but what goes hand in hand is a whole bunch of real good things. You know that folks with language-based learning differences are statistically more creative than the general population. So it is not my problem. It's a difference. My problem was being made to feel stupid because of the difference. That's my problem. And I'll tell you, we got a national crisis on our hands of young folks leaving school feeling dumb. And that national crisis has an origin. And that origin is a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence that leaves so many people out and wounds some humans deeply. You know, we confuse or conflate being good at school with being smart, right? But y'all know those are different things, don't you? Don't know about you, but some of the smartest people I ever met in my life, they didn't read well. They didn't write well. They didn't do school well, but guess what? They could rebuild the car engine from scratch. And that person is just as intelligent, just as valuable to society as that person with a PhD. And the flip side is true. Some of the stupidest people I ever met in my life have had PhDs, you know, can't get to the supermarket, right? So we have elevated one brain at the expense of all the other brains. And we've called that the smart brain, and by default, we've called those brains the dumb brains. And not only have we done that writ large as it pertains to school, being smart, at a young age, we confuse reading with being smart, right? You know, I'm the father of 3, and I'll tell you, every time I go to play dates, drop-offs, pickups, all I ever hear is how people have a genius on their hands in Santa Monica, California, right? And how do they know they got baby Einstein at home? It's always the reading. You know, I hear, "Oh, my kid's so smart, they're reading chapter books and they're in 1st grade. Oh, my kid's so smart, they know all their letters and they're 3 years old. Oh, my kid's so smart, they know phonics and they're in utero." Right? It's always the reading. It ain't ever "my kid's so smart, they're good at talking or drawing or building or connecting." It's a narrow band of skills that we have decided to call smart. And not only have we done that rhetorically and culturally, But systemically, if you don't have the school reading brain, you find yourself in the dumb group. Who remembers the dumb group? Anybody? Oh, let me ask that question differently, right? Because the reality is we all went to schools that had the smart group and the stupid group. They didn't call it that. It wasn't intentionally or inherently malicious, but it was there, wasn't it? Who remembers? Who remembers reading groups? Y'all remember reading groups? Can I ask you all a question about those reading groups? Was it ever hard to tell which reading group was the smart group and which reading group was the dumb group? It wasn't hard to tell, right? You had the blackbirds over here. You had the bluebirds over here. And then over into the annexed trailer building, you had the sparrows, you know? Come on now, we ain't fooling anybody. Let me put it this way. When I was growing up, everybody knew that my group was the dumb group because my group was a bird that did not fly, okay? It was an ostrich and it ran quickly, you know? And I was chilling out with C-Spot Ron and everybody knew that the condors were the smart group because the condors were reading War and Peace. And the worst thing about it is not only did I know that I was in the dumb group, I got that, but who else knew I was in the dumb group? Everybody knew. Some of the worst memories of my life were going over to the other side of the room. And let's be honest, C-Spot Run, not a bad book, right? Nice narrative structure, nice moral tale, but hey, you don't want to be caught dead with Spot when you are 14 years old, now do you? Spot's going to the shirt, in the backpack, because as I walk by all the other kids, I hear Jonathan, go back to your dumb reading group. Jonathan, go back to your stupid reading group. And then I hear Jonathan, go back to your retarded reading group. A word which should be treated as the moral equivalent of a racial slur, but is not in the vast majority of educational settings in this country. And that is wrong. Because we've all been steeped, we've all been acculturated in a narrow definition of what constitutes intelligence. We all know what gets you in the smart group, and it ain't your tactile kinesthetic intelligence. It ain't your social emotional IQ. It is a narrow band of academic skills that leaves so many humans out. And that's the problem. Not learning differences. So the problem isn't in the kid. The problem isn't the difference that we have turned into a disorder. The problem is in the interaction of difference and context. The problem is the passive learning environment. The problem is the narrow definition of intelligence. And ultimately, the problem is the negative self-concept kids like me learn. They learn that different is deficient. That they are stupid, crazy, and lazy. Words I've heard from kids all around this country. And that matters to understand where that comes from. Because it means that we as a community have to do everything we can to reframe this as not a problem in them, as different not being deficient. And as you all embark on that work, as moms and dads, as caregivers, as advocates, as educators, whatever it may be, I want you to intentionally develop a positive self-concept in the young people in your life. Because that's what mattered most to me. You know, I told you all I had a plan for suicide when I was 12. What saved my life was a videotape. No joke. My mom saw an interview on Dateline. She taped the interview, made me watch it, because the interview was with a young man, 25 years old. But the thing about this young man is he was in law school. He was dyslexic, and he couldn't read a word. And his mother, his mom, read every law book to him. Do you have any idea the hope that image gave me? Now, sucks to be the guy's mom, you know? I got that, but I didn't say it was a hopeful image for mom. It was a hopeful image for me. I saw in that moment that there was hope for my future, that different wasn't deficient, and that I was okay as I was. So as you all look to do that, don't tell the stories of famous people. Bring in real people to share their stories with young people. You know, the famous people are too far away. It doesn't do me much good to hear that Whoopi Goldberg is dyslexic. She is, that's true, but that's too far away. It doesn't do me any good to hear that Tom Cruise is dyslexic, or was until Scientology cured him, right? That ain't a cool message. What matters more is the senior in high school sharing their story with a ninth grader. A ninth grader sharing their story with a third grader. A small business owner who maybe didn't go to college but is living a good life, sharing their story to make sure that you saturate the kids in your life with the message that they're not the problem, that different isn't deficient. And that is the beginning of a journey of change. But it's not the end. You know, I told you there were 3 things that made a difference for me. That's the first one. Now let me tell you about the second thing that mattered in my journey. And this second idea is embodied in my life by my mom. So I want to give you a mental image of Colleen Mooney, because I would not be here if it wasn't for her. You know my mom? Not a tall woman, right? On a good day, in high heels, on her tippy toes, my mom is 4'11", right? Little Irish bulldog, right? And you know my mom? She's got this very funny voice. Very high-pitched, squeaky voice. My mom totally sounds like Minnie Mouse. She totally sounds like Minnie Mouse. And my mom, she also curses like a truck driver. So let me ask you all a question. If you were a principal, if you were a teacher doing wrong by her son, did you want cursing Minnie Mouse in your office? The answer to that question, by the way, if you are at all confused, is no, okay? But guess where my mom was every day when things were going wrong for her son? On my mom, she was in that office. How did we know she was in that office? Because every dog in the neighborhood was running away. Only bats could hear her high-pitched obscenities. Glass was shattering. My mom understood something, you know. She understood it intuitively, not something she read in a book. She understood that I didn't need somebody in my life to fix me. I needed somebody in my life to fight for and with me. And those are 2 very different things. You know, when we put the problem in the person as a culture, it leads us down the path of fixing the person. And that's a relentless remediation industrial complex that we are all swimming in. That's a message that's in textbooks that teachers read. It's not their fault. But my mom rejected that. And she said, my job is not to fix my kid. My job is to fight for my child's right to learn differently. And that's a very different path. So what does it mean for us, you know, as individuals in our own families, but then perhaps collectively as a movement to fight for kids' rights to learn differently? Well, it means first and foremost that we got to fight for kids' rights to receive specialized services, you know? We know more than ever. Research-based reading instruction matters. And if you have a dyslexic brain, you need some different support services. We need to advocate for that. You know, at a national level, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act has never been fully funded by any administration, Republican or Democrat. We need to fight to resource that law to give schools the resources they need. Those services matter. But you know what? We got to go beyond that. And we have to fight individually and collectively for students' rights for accommodations. You know, I'm here because of my mom fighting for accommodations. Accommodation is kind of a big idea. It's not the kid that should change, but the environment around the kid. I'm here because of accommodations that supported text to speech. You know, back in my day, it was books on tape. The thing was so big, you had to put it into a backpack and plug it into a generator, right? And you had Stephen Hawking in your ear all day long, right? have the world's literature in our pockets, on our phones, and every student has a right to access content at their intellectual level, not their reading level. And we should be fighting for that. You know, I'm here today because my mom fought for my right to have the accommodation of speech to text, right? Back in my day, it was the very technologically sophisticated tool of me saying shit to my mom and her writing it down, right? And we were made to feel like we were cheating all the time. But you know what? If we don't let kids get information out in different ways, they learn to dumb it down. You know what I used to do as a kid? I used to only write sentences or paragraphs with words that I could find on posters in the room. And if I couldn't find any words on posters in the room, we all know what you do when you can't spell something. Well, you scribble it so no one can read it, right? And that was a constant process of not getting my ideas out there and then people thinking I didn't have any ideas. Speech to text is universally available on everybody's phone right now. And we know from the research that the same pathways in the brain that are activated with writing are also activated with talking and dictating. So it builds that skill simultaneously. That matters. And you know, I'm here because of accommodations on assessment, right? And one of the most important ones for me was time extensions on exams. You know what? If you read in the 12th percentile and you have the attention span of a gnat, it's not fair that you have the same amount of time as everybody else. You know, when I take a test, I spend the first 15 minutes watching everybody click their pens and shuffle their paper. Then I spend the next 40 minutes reading the questions 5 or 10 times, and then I spend the last 5 minutes trying to get what I know out there. That is not fair. Because when we give a timed exam, we ain't testing how well somebody knows something. Guess what we're testing? How fast they know it. And why is how fast I know it more important than how well I know it? Are we trying to educate a generation of Jeopardy contestants? Accommodations on assessment matter, and we need to be advocates for that. But you know what? We gotta go beyond services. We gotta go beyond accommodations for kids like me, because accommodation has a little bit of a negative connotation to it, doesn't it? You know, accommodation is kind of like the word tolerance. We tolerate something we're all not that excited about, right? Let me put it this way. When my mother-in-law comes to town, I don't celebrate her visit. I accommodate her visit, right? We got to go beyond accommodation to universal design of instruction. To the idea that all of our institutions, our built environment, our places of work, and our schools have an ethical obligation to be designed around the foundational principle of human neurodiversity. That we are all on a continuum of learning styles, and we need to build environments around that reality. You know, I'll give you one of the best examples of the power designing environments through the lens of UDL has on somebody's life. You know, I just researched this new book. Spent 2 years writing it. And in researching this book, I learned about a movement of private sector employers who had an intentional focus on hiring folks with autism or Asperger's. Intentional focus. These were technology employers. This is not a charity, it's a business. A business that saw strength where other people only saw problems. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Don't know about y'all, but folks on the spectrum, they got strengths and talents that I certainly don't have. They're good systems thinkers. They're good problem solvers. And let's be honest, they're often more productive employees because they don't waste a lot of time on chit-chat, right? Not a lot of office cooler banter, you know? So I was intrigued by this place that saw value where everyone else saw problems, and I went to visit. And I wanted to know, did they try to fix the person, make the square peg fit the round hole, or did they do something different? The moment I got on the campus, it was obvious that they did something different. You know, the lights were turned down low. Why does that matter? Well, guess what? A lot of the so-called behavior problems associated with neurodiversity comes from overstimulation. It was a place of active working. You could stand, you could sit, you could walk, because we know movement is linked to productivity. And it was a place of intrinsic motivation. You could choose your projects because many of the neurodiverse are motivated when they choose and they care about their work. It was a place that was about changing the environment, not the person, and in doing that, they changed people's lives. You know, at the end of my visit, they were generous enough to have a cocktail party reception for me. And I have to tell you, if you haven't been to a cocktail party with 500 computer programmers with autism or Asperger's, you haven't lived, right? You got yourself a new item for your bucket list, you know? It was so much fun, and they were so generous. And about halfway through the reception, I sat down at a table, joined a group of folks who worked there, and engaged them in conversation to learn from them. And the moment I sat down, it had been apparent to me that they were just talking about me, right? Yeah, y'all have been there. You can tell when someone's talking about you, right? So I turned to the guy and said, "Hey, man, what y'all talking about?" And he said, "Nothing." Then I knew for sure. And I said, no. I am here to learn from you. I value your perspective. You all got something to teach me. What were you all talking about? And the guy looked at me, then he looked at his buddies, and he went back at me and he said, "Well, we think you're weird." And you know what? In their normal, I was. Normal's not a fact in the world we discover like oxygen. It's a construct we create, you know? And the good news of that is that with our practices and decisions and policies, we can create a bigger normal that includes more types of human beings. We can build environments that don't just work for some kids, but ultimately work for all kids. And that is a moment of change in my life. But it's not the last one, you know? The last one I want to share with you tonight is embodied by a teacher of mine. You know, if you are a kid who struggles in school, you are relentlessly surrounded by a deficit model, you know. All folks talk about is what's wrong with you. Very little do they say what is right with you. You know, when I was a kid, I had an IEP. Y'all know what an IEP is? For those of you that don't know what it is, an individualized education plan. Got to be real about that thing. NSA, KGB got nothing on the IEP, okay? They've been doing deep intel on me my whole life, flying unmanned drone missions over my house, and it is not good news in that file, right? You know, this guy named Thomas Ayer, former Secretary of Education at the U.S. Department of Education. He studies these files, and he's a professor at Harvard. And his research shows that for every one strength mentioned in the 504 plan, in the IEP plan, in the diagnostic testing, every one strength mentioned, it mentions upwards of 25 weaknesses. Imagine that being your life, you know? Imagine going to work every day and having people talk about what's wrong, not what's right. Imagine coming home and having your loved ones talk about what's wrong and not what's right. It is a deficit model. And we have to flip that script around kids. You know, I'm here because of that teacher who did that. You know, his name is Mr. R, third grade teacher. We celebrate that man everywhere I go because he had a relentless commitment to the idea that everybody had something right with them. And his job as an educator was to find the good and build on the good. So he would ask every kid every day, what are you good at? What are you good at? What are you good at? And he'd ask me that question. I was in IEP land, so I would say, I'm not good at anything, Mr. R. Nothing. Because I never heard anything good about me. So one day he came to me And he said, hey, Jonathan, I've been watching you, and you are wrong about yourself. You are so good at telling stories. Now, sometimes they're inappropriate stories that you tell, but I don't care. You are so good at telling stories that you could be a writer. I was 9. A writer, Mr. R? Are you out of your goddamn mind? I can't spell, man. The guy looked at me and he said, Jonathan, in my classroom, screw spelling. Screw spelling, man, yeah! You should have seen me jump out of my body. Because for the first time in my life, somebody said, forget what you can't do and focus on what you can do. And that was a revolution and a revelation in my education. Every child deserves that. They deserve a strength-based identity. But I'll be real with you, we got to go beyond just talking about the reality that young folks have strengths and talents, and we have to make time to nurture those in their day. Because, we got kind of good at talking about how all kids are different, Kids come to school in kindergarten, right? And they're told that they're all special snowflakes, right? We're all different. We're all special snowflakes. And then the bell rings, and it turns into, now sit your special snowflake ass down and take the standardized test, you special snowflake, right? The hypocrisy of the rhetoric versus the reality of nurturing individual interests and strength and talent is gaping. And we have to make time, and we have to fight for that. Because just like if you're a kid like me, you hear about all that's wrong with you, not only do you hear about what's wrong with you, but your whole day, your whole week, your whole year is all about fixing your problem, right? Kids who struggle in school, the first thing to go for them is all the good stuff, right? The robotics class is gone, the summer class is gone, and then it's phonics class instead, right? We focus on that remediation, and we got to fight against that and make time for interest. My mom did that, and it was a big old fight, When I was in elementary school, the biggest fight had to do with spelling tests, right? Spelling tests. When I was in elementary school, every Friday was spelling test day. What a wonderful way to end the week, And y'all know kids like me, I'd get my words on Monday. We would do 2 hours of flashcards to get those words in. Then we would do 2 hours of drawing the words in the sand. Then we would build the words with blocks. And then I would do interpretive dance to get the words in. And what happened every single Friday? Oh, I failed that test, right? Every Friday, Not just one Friday, though, never forget. Came on down from my room to the breakfast table, and usually we had one more round of flashcards with the Pop-Tarts, right? But not this morning. This morning, there were no flashcards. I said, hey, Mom, what's up? My mom says, Jonathan, today we are ditching school and going to the zoo. And every Friday, because the school would not capitulate on the importance of spelling and not make room for my interests. Me and my mom ditched school. She called it Get Good at Something Day. I went to the zoo because I loved animals. Learned a lot about natural habitats. We went to the construction sites of contractor friends of the family because I was the builder kid and I learned about the relevance of math. In school I was getting in detention for making jokes. So my mom took me to improv class instead, and I got a pause. My mom invested her time and our time in not what was wrong, but what was right. And it made all the difference. I'm here today with y'all because of those Fridays. Back in the day, the USA Today did an article on my first book. And the reporter said, hey, Jonathan, give us an inspiring message for the young people of America about how you made it to Brown University. And I said, well, ditch school, right? Because we ain't doing get good at something day at school. We're doing fix your problem day, you know? And that's a disservice because we've all been lied to, and subsequently we lied to children. We've been told that you got to be good at everything to live a successful life, right? You got to be good at math, you got to be good at science, you got to be good at history, you got to be good at social studies. But that's a lie. Successful human beings ain't good at everything. They get good at something, right? They learn to follow an interest or a talent on a pathway that is intrinsically motivating. That's what people who thrive do. And that's what I did. You know, Mr. R was right. You know, I'm good at telling stories, so I write books. But I can't spell. What do I do about that? Well, guess what? I married my spell checker, you know? It's called strategic mating, and if you haven't tried it, you should try it, right? Teams, technology, and help. Tapping into intrinsic motivation and building a pathway around interest and passion. That is the way for folks with differences to thrive in life. You know, let me give you one of the best examples of that I've seen. You know, one of the things I do here in LA is I work with young folks who have made some big mistakes in their life. And I help them nurture a talent and interest and build a life around it. And one of the first young people I ever worked with was this kid named Juan. Juan was a rough kid. He ran a 50-person drug ring in South LA. He was a serious narcotics dealer. He struggled in school, dyslexic, ADD, special ed, dropped out in middle school. Joined the family business, served his time, got out, came to my program, and said, you know what? I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to do that. But what am I supposed to do? I am dumb, he said. I am not good at anything. And I thought about Juan. I thought about Mr. R in my life, and a light bulb went off. And I said, Juan, 50-person drug ring? You're an entrepreneur! Now, I was honest with Juan. I said, hey man, we got to get you a different product, you know? We got to get you some stocks or some sneakers to sell or something, man. But right there are skills and talents that you can use to build a better life. So Juan, he enrolled in Harvard Community College right down the street from here. He studied small business development and graphic design because he was a gifted artist, misapplying his creativity onto the side of your building. He merged the two, created a small business that helped advertisers engage urban millennial youth. And he became the first in his family to go to and graduate from college, and he became the first in his family to earn a legitimate living wage. Did we fix what was wrong with Juan? Nah. We found, we cultivated, we nurtured, and we scaled what was right with him. And every human being, every kid deserves the same. Okay, I want to conclude. And in concluding, I want to come back to the heart of what this movement is all about. You know, this is about putting young folks with neurodiversities on a path towards success. And we know that that path is about reframing the problem, seeing these as differences, not deficiencies, and helping kids build a positive self-concept. We know that this path towards success is about advocacy, fighting for students' rights to learn differently, services, accommodations, and ultimately a reimagined and evolved approach to learning for all kids. And we know it's about fighting against that deficit model, not focusing on what's wrong, but on what is right. But last and not least, what runs through all of this, the heart of the work that we are doing, is to challenge this idea, deeply entrenched in our culture and systems, that there is a normal brain that we all should have. So I want to end my time with y'all with a quick story about the power and impact on a kid of challenging this idea that there's a normal that defines somebody's worth and value. And this story comes from a non-profit organization that I founded in my dorm room at Brown University called Eye to Eye. Eye to eye is a very simple thing. It takes young adults with learning and attentional differences, and it matches them with children who have similar experiences. It's all about giving them a sense that they're not alone, that they're not defective, that there's hope for their future. Eye to Eye is a national organization now. You can find it at eyetoeyenational.org, working in states all around this country. But when we started it, there was only 5 of us. Not 5 states, 5 Brown University students, 5 third graders in a special ed room on the south side of Providence. And it was the epitome of fake it till you make it, right? We had no idea what the hell we were doing. We showed up and we paired off. And I was paired with a young man named Julio. I shared my story with him, listened to his for about 20 minutes. And then I took a break. And I went around the room to listen to the other conversations because it was my program. I had to make sure everything was going okay. So the first group that I went to observe, they were quite a sight to see. The third grader, his name was Philip. And Philip was a hurting kid. He had school phobia, which means he would hide under the bed, beg his grandma not to make him go to school. When he was at school, he was so nervous about school and learning that he would rub his left eyebrow raw. So when I met Philip, he had no left eyebrow. So he's a hurting little kid. And then there was Philip's mentor, Brown University student named Kent Roberts. And Kent is a good friend of mine to this day. So when I say this, I mean it as a compliment. He is a complete freak show, okay? He's got a long beard down to here. He's got long hair down to here. The guy totally looks like Jesus, okay? Get him some Birkenstocks and a staff, and you got JC in the flesh, right? So they're a motley crew, you know? We got no eyebrow Philip, and we got Jesus-looking Kent, right? And I walk up to observe, and the moment I get within 5 feet, I hear Kent screaming at the top of his lungs at Philip. And Philip is 9 years old. And Kent is screaming, Philip, if you learn one thing in Eye to Eye today, you have to learn that normal people suck, Philip. They suck. That's not what Jesus says, man. I mean, come on now. I'm in a public elementary school. I think the cops are coming next, right? So I go home that night, and I call Ken on the phone, and I am furious. I think he has ruined Eye to Eye and scarred this kid. So I yell at him for about 10 minutes. How could you say that? What were you thinking? Why did you say that? Ken doesn't say a word until the very end. All he says is, it's true, and hangs up the phone. So I'm thinking maybe, just maybe, water under the bridge, right? You know, no teacher was there, no principal heard it, right under the rug, you know? Next morning, I get a call from Principal Mary Brennan, and I am respectfully summoned to her office at 9 a.m. So I drive over, and I'm thinking of all the ways I can apologize for messing this kid up. And when I get there to confirm my fears, not only is it the principal, but it's Philip's grandma. And if I learned one thing in my brief life, it is do not mess with grandma, right? Because the moment I walk into that room, before I sit down, she stands up and she points at me and she says, "What did you do to my grandson?" I said, "Nothing, it was that Kent guy." Hey, Jesus or not, I threw him right under the grandma bus. You know? She had tears in her eyes. She said, for 3 years, my grandson's hid under the bed before school. For 3 years, from our home to school, he's been in tears, begging me to turn around and go back. But today, the day after eye to eye, my grandson was up early, waiting in the car, ready to go to school. What did you do to my grandson? I said, well, it was my good friend, and you know what? It wasn't me. It was Kent. For the first time in Philip's life, he heard, "You're not broken." And that made all the difference. You know, we as a society have elevated this statistical myth of normal. And we've used it as a way to define people's worth and value as human beings. And if you deviate from that statistical middle of the bell curve, the message you get is that you are less than as a human being. And that wounds people deeply. And Kent challenged that. Kent said, "Philip, you're not broken. We're not broken. What's broken is that. The idea that there's a normal that we all should be." And you know, Kent was right. You know, normal's like the horizon. You think you're getting closer to it, it just gets further and further away from you. You know, if I've learned one thing in my life, it's that the only normal people are people you don't know very well. Because the moment you get to know another human being, the moment you see that human being, not for who you think they should be, but for who they really are, it is their differences that constitute their humanity. So our work together in the lives of the children that we care about is to challenge this idea that normal is a way to judge human value, is to celebrate difference as an essential part of the human experience. Our work together is to understand that young folks with differences will be successful in life not despite their differences, but because of their differences. But more importantly than that, our work as a community, as a movement, is to wake up every day and fight for every single human being's right to be different. Okay, thank you all so very much for listening.